last week, I think, Naran, she keeps me straight, I think it was Tuesday, I was a professional witness in court. And I want to remain professional here. One of the parties in the lawsuit decided to represent, Graham will really appreciate this, represent themselves. They did not know the precepts of a courtroom. So they started and they just went like a story about all the things. Now, you have to understand, talk about da'wah. This is a female judge. And the guy is talking about how his wife doesn't obey him in America. So I'm sitting there thinking, I'm making dhikr in the bench. I'm on the first bench writing. And I'm making dhikr and I'm thinking, oh God, you know. So after what happened was the judge finally had it, called the counsel to the bench, sent the witnesses out, and she said, listen, you come back with a lawyer tomorrow, but I'm not gonna. You cannot represent yourself. You just don't know you don't know what you're doing, basically. But then one of the sheriffs that were working in the courtroom, I guess the bailiff, came and said, I'd really like to know about Islam, and I gave him my card. So it'll be interesting enough to see if I hear from him. So it's just everything we're doing is about da'wah. So here we go to be a professional witness in the courtroom, and then we get a chance to do da'wah. So Sister Fazia, and I do want to get on with the class though, but go ahead, Sister. No, I can't. I cannot. The sitting is the worst. Yeah, so really I've got water, I've got coffee. I just think if I get into the Quran that I will find the healing that I need. So that's what happens for me. If I get into this, then I'll forget about the pain. And let me add this to that, brother. So this sort of, I make recommendations personally. But there was another imam there that was the expert witness for the other side. And so it's a really sort of uncomfortable situation because of the levels of rigidity that some people practice with. And so if you come as a mainstream expert witness and you have someone else come along that's very rigid, it can be a very interesting dynamic. So the bailiff actually asked me, are there some websites? So I said, I said to him, look, I don't recommend Sheikh Google or Sheikh Yahoo. You can get misled, a lot of bad information out there, and purposefully. There are people that have purposely set up websites to confuse people and to denigrate Islam. So the other imam piped up and said, which I was very happy, he said the Sheikh is absolutely correct. He said, I never recommend any website. I was so happy because unfortunately, sometimes people like to argue, and when you're doing da'wah, we're talking about coming to common terms with each other with beautiful words and eloquent speech. But often I'll be doing da'wah to someone, I've given them my card, and the Muslim will come along and then they want to give a dissertation. And it really does sort of block things up. I try to spend personal time with people though. So what I typically do is give my card and say, let's have coffee. Because, even we're taught in school when someone asks you for a fatwa, that you ask them, why are you asking that question? Is this applicable to you? Because of the intrinsic differences between one person's case and another person's case, you have to know what you're dealing with. And Sheikh Taha did a lot of training for us with that. How does this apply to your life so that we can make sure we don't miss anything. Today we're looking at Al-Hakeem, and for the non-Arabs in the room, does anything come up for you when you see this? What kind of roots, what kind of thoughts, what kind of words? Hikmah, very good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Hikmah, which is wisdom, exactly. Very good. Okay. So, you're always the teacher's pet. Okay. Al-Hakeem, the wise. Okay. And so, here we go. As you know, I always start with definitions. And so the most wise, the most judicious, which is amazing because I believe, and I have my judge here today, but I don't have my other lawyers, but justice, the balance of justice and wisdom is part of the scale of the legal system, right? That's what I thought, yes. So here, this actually comes from the Quran. It's amazing, but that's where it comes from. So when we're referring to the Asma wa Sifat of Al-Hakeem, referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is the one who is most knowing, the one who possesses the quality of discrimination between right and wrong, and who is free from error or misunderstanding. So it's one of the sort of unique things that you find in Islam is that when we say something and we're giving an opinion, what do we say afterwards? Allahu Alam. Allah knows best. There's a great humility in this, because the only all-knowing being in the universe is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this has been a great gift to me. It's actually very nice when I'm in a class and I get to say I don't know. It does something really nice for my soul. It's a good feeling to say to people, I don't know. I'll look into it, but I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah. The one who has perfect wisdom, the one whose wisdom turns mankind back from wrongdoing, the one who is qualified to judge the worth of all things. So as all of you know, the policy of I.S.L.A.M Inc. is non-judgmental, non-castigating, non-criticizing, non-indicting. We're not here to judge. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's department. I'm not qualified to be a judge. There's no way in the world that I have the accoutrement to judge any of you. Now, if I see a behavior that's absolutely contrary to the Quran, if I have your permission, if I have that kind of relationship with you, I can put my arm around you if you're a guy, okay, and say, you've asked me to sort of support you in spiritual growth, and this is what the Quran recommends. I can put my spiritual arm around my sisters, but not my physical arm. So from the root ha, ka, mim, and that's not the ka, but the ka. And the ka is just a little bit further, but like qaf versus ka. So this is the ka, okay? Hakeem. We find the following classical Arabic connotations: to prevent or restrain from wrongdoing or corruption. And there's a whole lot we can read into this if you really take every single phrase in the sentence. When you look at the to prevent or restrain from wrongdoing requires wisdom. Now, wisdom comes from what?
Knowledge.
Knowledge what?
Correct knowledge.
Correct knowledge what?
Correct knowledge.
Correct knowledge applied. That's sometimes is the wisdom of, the definition of wisdom is knowledge applied. Now, what knowledge are we talking about? The Quran and the Sunnah. We're talking about haqq. And really and truly, when you look at haqq, first, where do we look? To the Quran. Okay. To turn someone back from wrongdoing or ignorance. So a wise person is that person that puts their spiritual arm around you and says, I'm enjoining what is right and lovingly trying to forbid what is not right. So this is a practice among Muslims, but even among the scholars, it is to be done with beautiful speech, beautiful words and eloquent speech. So what I have experienced tremendous amount of in my lifetime as a Muslim, I'm a millennial, 31 years, has been a lot of castigation, a lot of criticism, and a lot of indictment. So my prayer for all of you is that you adopt that spirit of mercy that our beloved messenger of God had, I.S.L.A.M, and that you are merciful with people when you're working with them. A lot of times when I'm doing da'wah with people, I don't hear what they say. And you might be saying, well, men don't listen anyway. Well, that's not what I mean. For example, if somebody comes to me and says, I'd like to be a Muslim, but I can't be a Muslim because I can't have dogs. Or I have to wear the hijab, or all these things. So I know that's not what Islam is about. So I'm not going to make a big deal about that. I'm going to go right back to Tawheed. Because when Mu'adh went to Yemen, the Prophet ﷺ said to him, you're going to be among the people of the book. And the first thing you should do is teach them about Tawheed, the oneness of God. If they buy that, then teach them how to pray. So I will typically always drive my conversation back to the oneness of God. Had an interesting conversation with the father of the bride, who is a very, very, very bright man. Actually had a lot to do with the development of ISCF here in Orlando many years ago. And we were talking about this very idea. Very, very bright man. So knowing the true nature of things, to pass judgment, to decide, pass a verdict, and to judge and pass sentence. Well, the ultimate verdict comes from Allah and His Messenger. So. And this is why we have hukum. Now, hukum has more than one meaning, but hukum is usually order of God. So what you will find in Arabic is that the triliteral roots often have very similar meanings. So if you see the ha and the ka and the mim, hukum, even though it's an order from God, you see here again the tie-in of the order from God, and the Holy Quran is the haq, as the truth. And you see the wisdom and the justice, all of this coming together in a very solidified way, inshallah. Okay. I got to have some water here. So here you see the words hakam, hakeem, arise from the same triliteral root, but hakam is a verbal noun which emphasizes the delivery of justice, while hakeem is a noun which indicates the essential nature of the possessor of wisdom. So, sorry about that. Thank you. You guys will have to really help me today. So here again you see another comparison. One of the things that I love to do is to look at triliteral roots of various words in Arabiya and how they have this amazing meaning altogether, how they tie together. So Allah is referred to as the All-Wise, the Judicious on 33 occasions in the Quran. So who is the judicious one? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not me. Al-Hakeem is the one with ultimate wisdom, who did not create and legislate anything in vain. So, a lot of times people will say, wonder why Allah did this, wonder why this was created in this way. And it's part of the human condition to ask questions. But we know that Allah did not create anything, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in vain. Al-Hakeem carries out Al-Hakeem's divine will with Al-Hakeem's perfect wisdom. Al-Hakeem judges, decrees, inflicts, and relieves in the most rightful way, place, and time. When you really realize this and actualize this in your life, then you are truly able to say, Alhamdulillah. Whatever kind of adversity you're experiencing, whatever kind of bala, whatever kind of calamity, whatever kind of test you're experiencing, you actually can truly say, Alhamdulillah, because you know that in Allah's wisdom, there's no mistake. And I often refer to it as GPS, God's planning system. God has planned something for you that you may think is not good for you, but in fact, it's very good for you. And there's a verse in the Quran to that effect, that sometimes the thing that you think is not good for you is good for you. So, the root appears 210 times in the Quran, and 13 derived from Yakumu, which will judge, or Hukman, wisdom, judgment, and Al-Hikmah, the wisdom. So here again you see all of this this teaching, and yet I find among Muslims to be a culture of very judgmental people. And may Allah help us, may Allah deliver us from that. It is very hard to grow, it is very hard to be nurtured while you're being judged. How many people are motivated by rigid judgment? Okay. Just want to make sure. Maybe I thought I was very different or something. Okay. The attribute of Allah. Yes, Graham. Would you? Oh, I'm sorry. The attribute of Allah shows that Allah legislates rules to turn mankind from wrongdoing. All Allah's rules are for our own benefit. Al-Hakeem works most accurately and perfectly as Allah alone knows how to calculate, measure, and design in perfection. And of course, I already showed you how many times the triliteral root is in the Quran. We're just going to go over a few verses just to sort of give you an idea of this all-pervasive sense of hikmah that is within this beautiful name and attribute. So in Surah 27, verse 9, O Musa, verily it is I, Allah, the Almighty, the All-Wise. So here, a prophet of God is being reminded that Allah is the All-Wise. So often as we study various prophets, they would question God about something. Ya Allah, why this? Or, and then God remind them that He is the All-Wise, has the wisdom about all things. So in Surah 11, verse 1, Alif-Lam Ra, a book, the verses thereof are perfected and then elaborated from Allah, who is all-wise, well acquainted with all things. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of all things, then who has control of all things? Allah does. And when our iman is at a healthy state, a healthy place, then we trust that. We trust it actually with a conviction. And may Allah make us all to be at that station, inshallah. In Surah 41, verse 42, falsehood cannot come to it, the Quran, from before it or behind it. It is sent down by the all-wise one, the one worthy of all praise. So we also know that the Quran says that truth stands out from falsehood. You don't even really have to defend it. So this is why the methodology of the scholars is that the first thing they show you about any kind of thing that they're talking about is from the Quran, and then they will show you hadith to support as supporting evidence to that Quranic edit. In Surah 5, verse 118, that if you forgive them, and surely you are the mighty, the wise. So here we see a correlation of wisdom in forgiveness. So the wise person is a forgiver. And so if you process that and you think about the fact that how can Allah forgive you if you don't forgive others?
You were just talking about judgmental. So it's like they're doing wrong in their own selves, and also just the culture and the manners of giving dawah. You have to be very easy on your brother and sister. You have to be forgiving, kind, show an example.
Yeah.
And instead of just, here's the rule, you're breaking the rule, and you're that person.
And this is why we are not doing well with retention. So what research has shown is that within 2 years of somebody embracing Islam, they detach. They will still claim to be Muslims, typically, but they actually detach from the Ummah because of not being accepted, not being treated respectfully. In Surah 2, verse 129, and I'm not going to go through all 100 verses, by the way, just a few that I want to touch on so you can relax. And in Surah 2, verse 129, our Lord, and send among them a messenger for themselves who will recite to them your verses and teach them the book and wisdom and purify them. So here we see that purifying yourself has to do with wisdom, hikmah. And what is that ultimate wisdom? If I don't purify myself, I'm not going to fare very well on that day when there's no shade except from Allah. In Surah 31, verse 27, and if whatever trees upon the earth were pens, and the sea was ink, replenished thereafter by 7 more seas, 7 times the bodies of oceans on the earth, the words of Allah would not be exhausted. Indeed, Allah is exalted in might and wisdom, and wise. So here we recognize again that Allah is pointing us to the fact that all of this wisdom that He equates with that 7 bodies, 7 times the oceans that we already have, and what do we know that 80% of the earth is water? Is that correct? 70%? Okay. Allah is showing us something here, that if you want judgment, if you want wisdom, if you want right answers, where do you go? You go to the Quran. If you defer in a matter, you refer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messenger. And it's really interesting, and one of the blessings that I have as a therapist is that when people come to see me that are Muslim and they are conflicted, I will just say to them, well, what does Allah say about this? Because they're operating from that paradigm, so I have that blessing to do that. And Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 260, and mention when Ibrahim said, my Lord, show me how you give life to the dead. And here again, here is a messenger of God, the father of monotheistic faith, who says, he questions God. He asked God a question. He said, my Lord, show me how you give life to the dead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, have you not believed? And we're talking about a perfect messenger of God. Yes, Wali Allah, friend of Allah. Have you not believed? He said. Yes, but I ask only that my heart may be satisfied. And of course, this piece goes back to, I've been sort of hanging out carrots with you about how the heart is fed by how many signals?
By your akal,
Mm-hmm.
by your naps.
Yes.
So, and one more. So it's 3.
Ruh.
Ruh.
Yes. So here again, you can sort of see that Ibrahim A.S.A.L.A.M. is being reminded of this. Yes, but I ask only that my heart may be satisfied. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, take 4 birds and commit them to yourself. Then after slaughtering them, put on each hill a portion of them and call them. They will come flying to you in haste. And know that Allah is exalted in might and wise. I always love this story. In Surah 46, verse 2, the revelation of the book is from Allah, the exalted in might, the wise. Surah 57, verse 1, whatever is in the heavens and earth exalts Allah, and He is the exalted in might, the wise. You know that when you see al in front of these, it's the direct article. So even I.S.L.A.M is the direct article. So what changes it from al to as-ar or whichever prefix is if you have a sun or a moon letter. So then that's where you're getting this. But when you see these hyphenations for you who are beginning your studies, it is letting you know that it is the direct article. So that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is He, I don't like to say He, Allah is the wisdom. Okay? Allah knows all that is beyond the reach of a created being's perception. And here again, we often talk about how this akal deludes you. And if this akal is not filled with the right knowledge from the wise one, does not have hikmah, wisdom, because it has practiced that knowledge, then it can be easily what? Deluded. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So Allah knows all that is beyond the reach of created beings' perceptions, as well as all that can be witnessed. For Allah alone is truly wise, all aware. And then we will look at some reflections from the great names of Allah by Al-Sayyid Rashad Al-Masawi. And the word Hakeem is a superlative form or a form for the glorification of the one who has all the wisdom. Hence, Al-Hakeem is the one who is greatest in Al-Hakim's wisdom. Al-Hakeem is the most wise in creating everything and in perfecting such a creation. For Al-Hakeem wisely determined them, and Al-Hakim's wisdom means Allah's prior knowledge of everything and Allah's bringing everything into existence most wisely and perfectly. One of the beauties of this is when we talk about the Quran being the source of this wisdom, of this knowledge, I lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me, inshallah. Oh yes, I know what I was going to say. So when we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the source of this wisdom, what do we know from the Quran? That Allah has preserved this hikmah, this wisdom, this truth, this haqq, and it will never be tainted. And so here we have the Quran, 1440 years in the Islamic calendar, right? That has never been tainted, has never been changed. So there's another piece of unity, a piece of what we may refer to as tawheedness in looking at the Quran as an untainted, unchanged revelation. It is said that wisdom means the best type of knowing something through the very best of means. And what is the best of means? It goes right back to the Quran. Al-Hakeem means the same as Al-A.L.A.M. Imam Ghazali says that nobody knows Allah except Allah. Therefore, the only true Al-Hakeem cannot be anyone but Allah. Since Allah knows the origins of all things through Allah's eternal and perceptual knowledge, which nobody can ever conceive as being liable to extinction. Allah's wisdom agrees with knowledge and agreement, which does not permit even, and that's supposed to be a hint of doubt. And there again, it's when the Shahada becomes a kalima. Whenever you have made your Shahada in the beginning, it enters into your head, but as you go into sujood and you put that part of yourself, which you're so proud of, your head, lower than your heart, humility begins to set in, and it moves, and this is from authentic hadith, it moves from your head to your heart. And as long as it's in your head, typically you may not be experiencing the crying that is talked about or how the heart quivers when you talk about Allah. Because in that state, and it makes a lot of sense even from the psychological standpoint, it's a head trip. You're still trying to work it out. You've got it, it's speaking to you, but I'm looking at it still from my five senses. When I get to that spiritual realm, I embrace it and I ask the question, is the message that's coming to me from my ruh, which would mean that it would be from the Al-Hakeem, or is the message that's coming to me coming from the world, something outside of myself? So, for example, if I watch television and it tells me I'm not going to be cool unless I use this particular product, my akal has gotten an idea, right, a cognition, that I cannot be cool unless I use this product. Yes? So then I have to ask myself, where did that message come from? And does it align itself? Of course it doesn't. Al-Hakeem may also mean Allah's being holy, too holy to do anything which does not beseem Allah. In Surah 23, verse 115, what? Did you think that we had created you in vain and that you will not be returned to us? So here again we see, even in this wisdom, in the way that it's presented to us, in the way that Allah questions us. So somebody said to me this week, said, you ask a lot of questions when you're teaching. And of course, the methodology is to get people to think, to get people to look inside their heart, and then to ask them, is this from inside yourself or from outside yourself? Some scholars have said that Al-Hakeem is the one who is equitable in Al-Hakim's assessments, the benevolent in Al-Hakim's management of affairs. I didn't read the verse? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. In Surah 23, verse 115, what? Did you think that we had created you in vain and that you will not be returned to us? Yeah, I read that. Some scholars have said that Al-Hakeem is the one who is equated in Al-Hakim's assessments, the benevolent in Al-Hakim's management of affairs, the one who has determined the measure of everything, whose wisdom is the very ultimate end, who places everything in its right place, and nobody can really appreciate Allah's wisdom other than Allah. We cannot even really grasp. And the conversation I was having with this brother last night is how we have to be so careful when we're studying the Asma wa Sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we do not give Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala human characteristics. Because when we look at this, the only thing we can go from is the concepts that we have. But we have to be very, very careful with that. And because we cannot understand it, is the bottom line. We can just grasp. Allah will open our hearts, and I can say this to you that more than likely a year from now or even anywhere down the road, greater meaning will come to you about this. You will see deeper into this from your ruh, from your spirit, because you will connect it to other ideas from the Quran and the Sunnah, and that actually enhances your hikmah, your wisdom about certain matters, inshallah. Al-Hakeem is the one who is free from seeking any self-interest, nor can anyone object to anything Al-Hakeem does. Imam Ghazali says that Al-Hakeem is the one who is adorned with wisdom, And wisdom is knowing the best of things by the best of means. The best of everything is Allah Almighty. So Allah is the absolute Al-Hakeem, for Allah knows everything by the very best means of knowledge, which is eternal and everlasting. The knowledge which nobody can conceive to ever come to naught, nor can there be any doubt about it, and nobody can be described as such except Allah Almighty. So sometimes we will hear somebody say, oh, he is a wise old man, or she's a very wise person. And so we understand in the context of the world that we live in what that means, that this person seems to have some guiding principles from Quran and they actually implement them. And therefore we regard them as wise. But in no way, shape, fashion, or form does that compare with the wise. Will a wise person say, I'm wise? No. Because a wise person will know that they're nothing in terms of wisdom in comparison. I mean, there is no comparison. Allah says very clearly, there is none like unto me. So there's no way. So never think for a moment that you're like God. And we hear this a lot in Christianity, be godlike. Well, what we know in Islam is that's impossible. We can try to adopt attributes, characteristics of our Lord on this plane, but they have nothing to do with the real essence of that characteristic coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And not to be confused with knowledge, because there are a lot of hafiz, and may Allah guide them, who have memorized the Quran from beginning to end. They can't explain it, and not only that, they don't practice. So I remember one time when we first moved here in 2001, I was asked to do a da'wah event over in a huge home on Kilgore Road. 125 people were seated in the foyer of this home. It was interesting, and I drove up in this car that was about to fall apart. And of course, they had me to park right in front of this massive mansion. But the point was, I saw something I'd never seen, and the Hafiz dropped the table on his foot and used profanity. Well, I was shocked because I was still naive, even in that point, very naive, that I could not imagine that the vessel, the cistern of Quran, will know they're going to recite Quran at an event, but then use God's name in vain. And it really affected me for a long time. So I went to one of the Hifz teachers and said, you really need to work on teaching the Hafiz to live what they learn. Because the principle is that the companions did not learn anything else until they implemented what they had learned. So you learned one thing from the messenger of God, you practiced that, then you got to learn something else. But this is the spirit of Islam. So today, it's and the comparison to that is, I can take a donkey, I can put all of Sahih Bukhari on it, all of Sahih Muslim on it. So that's, 12 books? No, there's 11 volumes of Bukhari and 4 of Muslim. Then I can put the Holy Quran on it. Does the donkey carry the wisdom, the hikmah? Has that knowledge, but isn't going to practice it. And so we can often be donkeys. We have a lot of knowledge, maybe we think we do, but in reality we aren't implementing. One of my greatest teachers said to me, he who knows does not speak. A very, very powerful lesson in my life. He who knows does not speak. And so when people want to debate with you, and I know for me this became a real practice, that if I knew the answer, I wasn't going to argue with them. So I said, okay, it's not important to me, okay? I'm not as good at that as I'd like to be, but oftentimes that is my practice, that if people want to argue something and I know it, or some detail of something, I just say, okay. Because it's not really in the scheme of life, how important is it? My wife's laughing. I'm going to leave that. Okay. Al-Hakeem means the wisdom behind Allah's creation of things, the perfection of Allah's management of their affairs, and the accuracy of Allah's assessment thereof. None among what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created can combine all these qualities. Some of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created cannot be described as having strength of body, such as ants and insects, but ants demonstrate the ability to manage things, providing the proof regarding the might and knowledge of their maker. Nothing demonstrates such might more than Allah's creation of the heavens and the earth, the mountains, the oceans, which all testified to the knowledge and might of the Creator in Surah 32:7. Allah made everything Allah created good. So, there's a piece, I haven't sort of really processed this fully yet, but that it came to me when I was working on this class, how that every creation of Allah is praising Allah. So that perhaps sometimes the creations of Allah have more wisdom than the human creation of Allah. Because that tree and that rock that we may discount is bowing to Allah. But that human who Allah has given will is not bowing. They're actually rebelling, running away. What is meant is not the beauty of their view, for this is lacking in the case of, say, monkeys and pigs. But what is meant, and I don't mean to be dissing monkeys and pigs, it was just an example, okay? It is a creation of Allah. But what is meant is the great organization of putting everything in its right place according to the function it plays. And this is the implication of Surah 25, verse 2. But we'll get to the verse in a minute. Yes, brother?
But actually Allah turned some people to monkeys and turned some people to pigs.
Yes, absolutely. Very.
Exactly true.
Yeah. Amazing. And if you think about this, when we look at the human soul with the angelic part, the animal part, the beast part, the demon part, we as humans become worse than animals. Animals have an instinct that Allah put in them. And I often tell this story, if you see a herd of deer, or is it a pride of deer? Herd of deer. And the lion comes in, the deer will stand, they'll look, and they know that that lion is only going to eat one of them because that's its instinct. Once it starts in on the one that it's chosen for its course, the rest can go. Now humans that become worse than animals or beasts, they go into the post office, snap, and kill 14 people. No animal will typically kill, in my knowledge and studies, 14 other animals. They're just going to get what they need to eat. So there's so much to learn in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we think that all of these things that we're looking at here, they're praising Allah, but what am I doing? What am I running my mouth about, maybe? As Hassan talked about how much we talk. And here's the verse. And who created everything, then ordained for it a measure. Powerful verse. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything and ordained for it a measure, a place, a station, an intention. And what did Allah say? He created men and jinns for naught except that? To worship Him. So that was what we were created for. Okay. And Surah I.S.L.A.M says, it talks about the order and the proportion that we give to our soul. Okay. Verses 7 through 10, right, Laith? You and I just were talking about this.
Yeah, I.S.L.A.M.
I.S.L.A.M, yeah. Alhamdulillah, I'll come back to that. Another viewpoint says that wisdom means getting to know the truth for its own sake and to know goodness in order to act upon it. A servant of Allah, though his portion of knowledge and potential is little, such a shortcoming is evident in him when compared to the knowledge that mighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, and to the knowledge of the angels and their ability. Yet whatever amount human beings have been given is quite significant by the token that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has deemed it right. Now this is an interesting piece here because although I struggle with this, intelligence quotient, IQ, was perhaps, and there's a lot of empirical data to this, established to create superiority in other people. And when we began doing IQ tests, what was the population that it was based on?
White people?
White people, house supremacy. But this is the fact. So that if you administered the WAS intelligence quotient test, it was unfair because people from one culture may not have an idea what an avocado is, for example. So if you were asked this question, it's based on the culture of the white population that it eventually started on. They've done some work to correct it, but in terms of never mix up wisdom with knowledge, though, or intelligence, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives every human being their measure of intelligence, whatever He wants them to have. I can go and do 3 PhDs, and the likelihood is that my IQ would not increase more than 2 or 3 points. Because Allah has given, what He's given me is what He's given me, and that's what He's given me.
So what definition you will give us for wisdom for human?
Knowledge applied. Islamic knowledge applied. So when my aqeedah is correct, then the cognitions in my brain will be correct if I behave upon those cognitions, or if it's in my ruh, because that's the DNA of spirituality, then I am behaving according to what I'm hearing within myself from the Quran and Sunnah, then I will be a person of wisdom, technically speaking, because I am practicing what Allah has said to do. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, in a lot of ways, wisdom is sort of like commitment. Commitment is a word, but it's not really a commitment till you show up. And this is my definition of commitment. Go to the masjid on a Saturday morning at Fajr and tell the brothers, look, I have a side-by-side refrigerator and a sleeper sofa that I'd like to move today. Can you help me out? Now, how many people have moved those 2 items? Nothing is worse to move than a sleeper sofa because the bed wants to jump out while you're moving the sofa, and the side-by-side refrigerator is so awkward. So the brothers say, yeah, I'll be there, mashallah, I'll be there. So you're standing there waiting when you get back for them to come. They said they were committed. They said they were committed. Commitment is when you show up. I deem by Allah, sister, that wisdom is really when you show up. When you have the knowledge and you implement it and it becomes part and parcel of your life. Allah knows best. And that is how the shahada becomes a kalima. Because the kalima means that I have conviction behind those words. So the first time most of us said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, we might have known, I know I'm being guided to this, but the conviction, this absolute knowing, I've never seen it be there from the beginning. And this, of course, aligns itself with the prophetic saying. Let me add something, if I may, to that, because you often hear me talk about coming from the ruh, operating from the ruh. If you're operating from the ruh, you'll be operating from a place of wisdom. Because the ruh will feed you that which you've learned from Allah, and that spirit that was blown into your mother's womb at 120 days into gestation, which gave you the fitra, which is the innate wisdom, the innate awareness, the natural inclination to fitra, to your connection to God. But that's an unseen phenomenon. But you will know it. So for example, when I'm fasting and I go to do iftar, and I am fasting with ruh, I don't run to that table like an animal and eat like a hog after I've been fasting for the sake of Allah. I actually go to that table and I make a dua and I thank Allah for that food. And I'm aware that I'm getting to eat, and a lot of people are not. So, when we go back to hal, I see you, Fawzi, I'm going to come to you. When we go back to hal, it's a state. So in Arabic we say kayfa halak. We're not saying what's up, dude. We're saying what is your state. So it's really interesting, and I often talk about this among Arabs. It's very sincere. If you meet the older Arab people, they will say, what is the state of your grandfather? What is the state of your mother? I believe she was sick. But it's really meant about what is the state. It's not like, what do you know? But it's a spiritual question. And I think what you're saying is very valid, because it shows that Hakeem has more than one meaning. And that's another one. We are told, and I forget how many times, that Allah asks us to ponder, reflect, and contemplate. So that does take you, it's a different kind of wisdom. It's like a greater awareness of a piece of knowledge. I'm going to say a cognition that you have. So maybe, exactly, that opens the doors. Well said. So if we look at Surah 26, can we go to 12:30? Because we're not going to finish this today. There's been a lot of discussion. So is that all right? Okay. If you need to go, feel free to go. I understand. So in Surah 26, verse 83, and whoever is granted wisdom is indeed granted a great deal of goodness. So here's another definition. So I could give you a test and say, is there a correlation between wisdom and goodness? And here's the proof. Absolutely. It's the application again. And then, of course, the many, many prophets throughout the Holy Quran, may Allah be pleased with all of them, Lord, grant me wisdom. Lord, grant me wisdom. And I will say that a lot of my dua in life has been, Allah, give me wisdom. Give me wisdom. Allah commanded Prophet Dawood, saying in Surah 38:20, and we granted him wisdom and a clear judgment. So there's a piece here that without wisdom you cannot have a clear judgment. Interestingly enough, one of the professional witnesses, one of the things you have to do is you have to give credibility. You have to prove that your witness has credibility. And so this witness talked about having 9 years of education in Islamic studies. But interestingly enough, the fact that they had that education, they were not able to articulate for that judge what the judge wanted. So there again, I thought it's a prime. Here you've got this person that spent 9 years studying Islam, but they could not articulate. Scholars have said that wisdom means knowledge, and we sort of talked about this before. Knowledge may either be knowing what can exist without our choice or doing, which is theoretical knowledge, or it may be knowledge of what can happen by our choice and doing, which is practical knowledge. Theoretical knowledge may either be the means towards an end, or it may be an end by itself. The means, for example, may be the science of logic, the deduction of which is determined by what concepts and assertions mankind can conceive in a way which does not permit except a very rare margin of error. So I find this interesting because if you look at theoretical knowledge, such as calculus, which everybody loves and just can't wait to take in college, and statistics, these kind of things, very sort of a theoretical knowledge, but do we typically look at those kind of theoretical knowledges, or pieces of knowledge, I should say, as a wisdom? No, it's raw knowledge, right? Yeah. It's, a matter of fact, interestingly enough, the way that I scored in the top of my class when I did my 9 hours of Arabic in my master's program, but they did not teach us how to pronounce things because we were traveling. The way I treated it was simply like statistics. I knew that if I changed from fil madi to fil mudari to fil amr, and what I'm saying there is to the tense of the verb that is past time, present, or command, that I had to simply do a mathematical equation. I had to put a sukoon here and take the fatha or the kisra off there. Simple things that are theoretical knowledge, and that's how I actually did so well in Arab, but I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. I just knew what to do. Sort of like statistics. I was afraid of statistics, and I did so well in college because it was just rote. Take the equation, put in what you need to put in, and you'll get the results. So it's very interesting when we separate kinds of knowledge even. I think there's a great deal of hikmah, a great deal of wisdom in that. As regarding what is considered as the ultimate end, be informed that things may be classified into three categories. They may either comprise a substance, or they actually are not supposed to exist in a certain substance, or either case may be applicable to them. What is supposed to be in a substance should either be in a particular substance, and the science which researches such portion of what exists is called natural sciences or physics. So here again we have a very scholarly, this I pulled out of a book, for you to see how deep scholars have contemplated and reflected on this very issue. What ought not to be in a particular substance and hope to be in some other substance, the science that researches it is called the science of mathematics. As regarding the other part, which is not supposed to be in a particular substance at all, the science that researches it is called theology. As regarding the third kind, the one which may be in a particular substance or may not, the science researching it is called the inclusive science. And it is like the knowledge of the unit, the multiplicity, the causation, the deduction, the completion, or the deficiencies. All of this falls under the category of theoretical knowledge. Now, what is really interesting, and I know it's probably a little complex today to dive into, but there are 113 sciences in Islam. They're beautiful, elaborate charts of the sciences that were studied by the great scholars of Islam. Classifications that are unbelievable. Just to throw that out in terms of, if you want to contemplate on this, there is a whole science that you can study. You could actually major, you can actually get a degree in this sort of field of science within Islam. You could go to Al-Azhar and specialize in this kind of study. Practical knowledge may either be, and so what do we hear in the world before I read this? In the world, some people will say, well, that person is so bright, they're so intelligent, but they have no common sense. How many people have ever heard that before? Yeah, they say, they can't get their, don't know how to find their way out of the rain or something. So you'll hear people say these horrible things, but it does sort of define what we're talking about here. That you'll have, and what is the other saying? There's a fine line between genius and insanity. So you'll have these extremely bright people who have IQs out the roof, but yet if you talk to them about a simple matter in the world, they're like lost. They really cannot communicate on that plane. They're on a different frequency, I say. Practical knowledge may either be the researching of the conditions of man regarding his own body, which is called the science of physiology, or his or her conditions with members of his or her household, which is called the science of domestic management, or his or her conditions, ties to relationship with the rest of the world, which is called political science. So here again, I just gave a few examples of sciences that I hope that you would be sort of already aware of, that would sort of tweak a deeper understanding, inshallah. The person who personified wisdom in his everyday conduct among people is the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. By the token of this verse in Surah Al-Imran, verse 164, certainly Allah conferred a benefit upon the believers when Allah raised among them an apostle from themselves, reciting to them Allah's signs and purifying them. So before I finish this slide, what I want to point out is that when you become aware of Allah's signs, and when I say awareness, I don't mean cognitively. I mean in your ruh, in your heart. Because the intellect of the heart, Islam says, is where really our intellect is. This intellect up here is very, very subject to delusion. Okay? Did you have something to say, brother? Or you just were scratching your... Okay. I'm not picking on you today, I promise. Omar is a person who often shares very beautiful things in his quiet way, and so I don't like to leave him out if he raises his hand. I like to hear what he says. So may Allah continue to bless you with that, brother. Okay, so Allah's signs in purifying them and teaching them the book and the wisdom, although before then they were surely in manifest error. So the lesson here is that if you do not have the Quran al-Kareem, you will be in manifest error. And let me speak to this. Yes, we believe in the people of the book, and there's no but coming. I want to make sure you understand, because it sounds like a but could be coming. We do respect the people of the book. We recognize the people of the book, and we recognize that there are other holy books. Do we have the original forms of those books? We do not. So if you really want, on a spiritual level, and I want to be inclusive here, and it may not come across quite as I want it to be, but if you really want to have wisdom, can you have wisdom without the latest revelation? No. So it's interesting, in the khutbah of necessity, the khutbah al-hajjah that I did not do today, I just realized that. What does it say? Those who are guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no one can misguide them. Those who are not guided by Allah, there is no guide for them. There is no hikmah for them.
So that's so weird. I was going to ask you, I made a note to ask you about it after class of why you didn't start class.
Yeah, I just, probably the hydrocodone is probably why I didn't start it. And that was about 3 this morning. I'm a little surprised. But. All right, the person, okay, so we did this. Did I read the verse, folks? Yes, okay. The wisdom in as far as the servants of Allah are concerned is to say and do what is right as much as is humanly possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 269, and that's supposed to be Allah grants wisdom to whomever. I sometimes record into Dragon Naturally Speaking, and this is a mistake. The Lord, Allah grants wisdom to whomever Allah pleases, and whoever is granted wisdom is indeed given a great deal of good, and none but men and women of understanding mind. And this is about what kind of understanding? Quran and Sunnah. So if basically this verse is saying, if you don't have this, you will not have this kind of intellect, the spiritual intellect. A wise person among people is one who precisely calculates minute things. He or she masters them and skillfully executes them. So here again, what do we say it is? It's knowledge applied. Skillfully executing. So let's talk about skillfully executing for just a minute. If I'm praying with khushu', presence of heart, okay, then I am actually strategizing. Is that not an act of wisdom? I know that when I have to think, I have to contemplate that when I go to pray and I say Allahu Akbar, I'm actually saying Allah is the greatest, greater than anything in the world, and I'm stopping everything I can do, and I'm putting the whole world behind me, and I'm just before Allah. Okay. There's that wisdom. We are taught piece of knowledge. Piece of knowledge, pray with khushu'. If I have the piece of knowledge, but I never do it, I don't even try, I just, alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen, alhamdulillah, I'm so glad I got, oh, no. And then I start thinking about everything in the world while I'm praying. Then it just remains a piece of knowledge. I said I would stop at 12:30. Would you like me to go on? Let me just see something. Or are you tired? We have, I think, 10 more slides. Would you like it? Are you... You're exhausted?
I was out.
You have to leave now? Okay.
Pretty quick.
All right. So I'm
I don't want to do whatever you have to do, brother. It's all
Okay.
right with me.
okay. What's the consensus? How many yeses? Okay. How many no's? Okay. Okay. So if you need to leave, sister, you absolutely have permission to go. That sounds funny, but it's just a... Imam Ghazali attracts our attention to the fact that anyone who gets to know everything, if this is possible at all, without getting to know Allah, does not deserve to be called wise. For he or she did not know the greatest of everything and the most sublime among them.
Next slide.
Oh, thank you. Wisdom is the greatest knowledge, and its greatness depends on the greatness of what is known. And surely there is nothing greater than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here you have a person who will try to convince you how wise they are. And then you ask them, do you believe in God? And they say no. then they missed the greatest piece of wisdom. And so here you see this. Anyone who gets to know Allah is wise, even if his or her share of all of the secular branches of knowledge is most modest. The ratio of the wisdom of any of Allah's servants to that of Allah Almighty is like the ratio of such servants' knowledge to that of Allah, and what a vast difference it is, and what a vast distance it is between both norms of knowledge. Yet despite the huge gap between both matters, wisdom is regarded as the most precious of all types of knowledge and the most fruitful, and anyone who is endowed with wisdom is surely granted a great deal of good. So we should always ask Allah that He gives us wisdom. Okay. To derive... Can I get some more water? To derive a good conduct from the great name Al-Hakeem requires a servant of Allah to be wise, that is, to do his or her best in whatever good deeds he or she does, and that his or her condition is pleasing to others, that is, based on following the commandments of Allah and distancing him or herself from whatever Allah has enjoined us to be distinct from, and taking extreme care in performing his or her religious obligations, distancing him or herself from following his or her own whims and desires, staying aloof from any doubtful matters. So here again we see the reinforcement of this idea that I may have a tremendous amount of raw knowledge, but if I'm not consciously, intentionally practicing what I have learned for the sake of Allah, what if I'm practicing it for show off?
No benefit.
It's not going to be any benefit to me. And this is where this ruh piece comes in. The older I get, the more aware that I try every moment to ask the question, is what I'm doing coming from the ruh? But really self-examination of this consistently. Because I don't want to be coming from show. I don't want to be coming from my ego, that kind of thing. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ has said the head of wisdom is fearing Allah. A wise person is one who indicts his or her own self and learns about what will come after death. So if we look at the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ at the end of his day, he would review his day, self-examination. What could I have done that would have been perhaps with more khushu' or with more wisdom or with more, because he was a perfect man. But yet he would examine. A feeble person is one who follows his or her own desires and still desires even more from Allah. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ has made many wise statements in this regard. A Bedouin once came to the Messenger of Allah and asked him to teach them something good to say. He told him to say, "There is no God except Allah, the one and only God who has no partner. Allah is great, greater than everything. Praise, a great deal indeed of praise, is due to Allah. Glory to Allah, Lord of the worlds. There is no power nor might except in Allah, the Honorable One, the Wise." The Bedouin said, "All this is from my Lord. What about something from my own self?" The Messenger of Allah ﷺ taught him to say, "Lord, I invoke you to forgive me, to have mercy on me, to grant me guidance, to grant me good health, and to grant me an increase in sustenance." So these are the dua of people with wisdom. If you study these dua, they are the dua of people with wisdom. They humbly recognize their limitations, and they know that only through Allah can they get beyond where they are. Do you have?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
I am calculating something in my head, but
Yes.
it's not.
Imam Malik has indicated that Luqman, the wise, admonished his son, saying, "O son, seek to seat yourself near the scholars, and do so kneeling on your knees. For Allah gives life to the hearts through the light of wisdom, just as Allah brings life to a dead land through a good rainstorm." So what we know in the authentic hadith, that it says that if we do not sit at the feet of scholars within 3 days, our heart what? Begins to die. Another hadith says, if we do not visit the house of Allah, we begin to be like a fish out of the water. Well, what happens if the fish comes out of the water? He starts flailing around and goes crazy. I mean, so we have to have a consistent diet of correct knowledge. And let me go back. If I don't have correct knowledge, will I have wisdom? No. Al-Hakeem, praised and exalted is Allah, is repeated 83 times throughout the text of the Holy Quran. Al-Hakeem means the possessor of penetrating wisdom, which is knowledge of things that really are, and doing actions. Sorry, let me say that again. Al-Hakeem means the possessor of penetrating wisdom, which is knowledge of things as they really are, and doing actions in the most perfect manner. So what we know about, for example, the therapeutic process is that we get people to examine if what they're thinking is what really is. So it's a huge science today. Everybody talks about mindfulness. Well, mindfulness was prescribed by the messenger of God from the beginning. It is also said that Al-Hakeem means the proficient, Al-Muhkim, coming from the word Ihkam, which means mastery, and which refers to Allah's supreme management and perfect competence. There is a great message for us in this, in the sense that if you want to go from Nafs Amara to Nafs Lawama to Nafs Mutma'inna, which are 3 stages of development of the soul that are mentioned in the Quran, if you want to go from being a Muslim to a Mu'min, one who is a Muslim to one who is convicted of that, who is a real practitioner, the doer of this, then you have to have mastery. You have to master your practice of Islam. You have to master the art of prayer so that you are praying with khushu', inshallah. One who knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Hakeem will never object to Allah in any manner. So you see, if someone comes to you and says they are wise, and then you say to them, the Quran says so and so, and they say, yes, I know, but, then are they wise?
No.
One who knows that Allah is Al-Hakeem will never object to Allah in any manner, and never consider Allah's wisdom suspect in anything. Indeed, he or she will see all of Allah's actions as beautiful, even if the same cannot be said when the actions are ascribed to us. Sheikh Abd al-Qadir al-Jilani said, if you ascribe every ugly thing to Allah's goodness, the spiritual meanings of goodness will rush towards you. The deficiency of the ugly is made whole by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's beauty. Thus, there is, in reality, no deficiency or ugliness. Very, very powerful. Only a wise person can understand this. You have to have wisdom to understand this. So, part of the human condition is often because of this aql that confuses us, is to judge things with no basis whatsoever. But so you'll hear people say, this is my opinion, this is who I am, and this is just the way it is. Very arrogant. But here you go, there's nothing ugly in the sight of Allah. So we have this huge marketing strategy in this part of the world anyway, where everything is focused on that aspect, that realm. Not spiritual at all. But how many times do you think people think of something as ugly on a daily basis? If you really know Allah, you'll say, no, that's the creation of Allah. Allah didn't create anything ugly. It's just what it is. But how many struggle with that ideology? It's so juxtaposed to how we're programmed in this world. One connects with this name by seeking to know Allah's wisdom, which is Allah's mastery of all things and creation thereof, outwardly, while seeking to know Allah's omnipotence, which is Allah's creative power, inwardly. Wisdom is therefore the effect of divine power upon things. Divine power manifests while wisdom masters and conceals. So the wise person knows that I will keep mastering what I'm doing. There's a humility in that. The reality is that where there is naught save Allah's omnipotence, wisdom therefore is the locus of divine laws, and omnipotence is the locus of ultimate realities. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 269, and I'm repeating it because I thought we needed to say it again here. Allah grants wisdom to whom Allah wills, and whomsoever is granted wisdom is granted much goodness. Al-Badawi said, wisdom is the mastery of knowledge and action. This then is the door one enters to witness divine power. So this awareness of this is the door to actually have divine power. One cultivates this name in their character by being wise in their statements and actions, and indeed all of their affairs. One realizes this name when one reflects knowledge of divine wisdom outwardly and knowledge of divine power inwardly, thereby gathering and balancing between wisdom and power, giving everything its due right and measure. Its due right and measure. Yes. The Arabic word Hakeem is related to another Arabic word meaning to bridle the horse. I used to ride horses in high school, and if the horse is more powerful than the rider and the horse knows that you're afraid, you will not have a very good experience. More than likely you will be thrown off a horse. If the rider is confident, has the wisdom of riding, the art of riding, and knows how to deal with the rein, then it will control the horse. And it's a very similar example here. If we don't have the right aqidah, the right understanding of Islam, we will not control the horse inside of us. The horse will be a wild horse, untamed, untrained. It is also a good clue as to how we can become more wise by controlling ourselves. Our likes and dislikes, our fears and desires are like a wild horse that we need to learn to control. Only then can we lead happy and successful lives. So we will take a few minutes. If anyone would like to add anything, ask any questions, make comments, share, we'll open that opportunity. And thank you for agreeing to let's finish this, because I think it's has a great merit. Any questions, comments?
It's just the difference between Muslim and Momin. And the Momin is always keep struggling and improve their, whatever knowledge or personality. And I just say, if the painter is saying this painting is awesome and I cannot paint better than this, his artist is finished, dead.
Yeah.
Same with architects. So human keep going
Yes.
above and above, and that is Momin.
Very good. And yes, Albert.
So that verse that you had,
269?
Yeah. I think it's really important, as you had just covered all the other slides, and then talking about the soul, or I guess the root.
Yes.
That when I started to practice meditation and started to read a lot of non-theistic Buddhist principles to, clean up my own life and to quell the mind, it is very essential that step is taken care of before this can then be above. The brain, because like you said, the brain's very corruptible. But just that verse alone will help you understand what to ask of God when you do pray too.
Yes.
So that was something that I was telling him, how a lot of Christians pray. They might, praise you God, and hey, can you please help me to pay my mortgage, do this, do this, and this. And it's a lot of worldly things they ask, but it's knowing that he chooses whatever that verse had said, but it is his choice to grant upon whomever he chooses.
Yes.
What he chooses. And so I think that would really humble someone when you do go to pray for God, how you praise him and what you end up asking for, and what is important to ask for. But also the question is, how are you working towards what you ask of God? So if transportation is really important, maybe not necessarily asking for a car, but there's other forms of transportation, but how are you working towards it if it's important for you to say make a living, or if you ask for more wisdom or
See,
more understanding, how are you working towards it?
The beauty of Islam is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognizes different stations of the believer, of the human being. So for example, we live in this physical plane and we need certain things. We are allowed to make dua for Allah to do that. According to our level of iman though, there is a station that people get to, the word maqam. I don't like to say level because that sounds like one is superior to the other, and that's not the case. It's a horizontal thing. I might be here and you might be over here, and with me being over here, I have this skill set. You being over here, you have this skill
Well,
set.
it's personal to the person. It's not like, so yes, it is your
Journey, yes,
level
exactly.
of enlightenment towards
Right,
understanding wisdom.
exactly.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. There was a point I was going to share with you, and it's sort of left me, but it'll come about the station. Yes. Oh, okay. So this is why this judgment piece is so powerful, because only Allah really knows where I am, and this is why the humility of not ever being too cocky about where we might be. Because really and truly, if you were to study Islam for another 100 years, if God gave you another 100 years of life, you will just touch the surface. There's more about Islam that I don't know than I'll ever know if I were to live to be 200, because it just keeps going. But the piece to where I was going back to is, you have to examine when you're in those stations. Am I coming from my ruh? Or am I coming from my head? My head. My heart and my ruh is sort of oftentimes contextualized anyway as a similar thing, but it's not quite in the text of what I'm talking about. That ruh, that spirit of God in you, being in touch with that fitra, means that I am conscious that I want to be in the divine presence of Allah. Without that, I am going to tend to think up here, and it's going to paralyze me spiritually. Is that?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So I guess what I'm saying. I mean, if you were to pray, and then if you get very, very specific in what it is that you're asking for, sometimes you can have great disappointment.
Right.
Later on, because you may have been asking wrongly from the wrong area, and so yeah, that's what I was saying. But also, just so many people do go through the motions and then pray and then ask, but they don't take the action to want it, to get to know you better. Well, what are you doing to get to know me better?
Right. But let me speak to that too. We are not allowed to beat ourselves up as Muslims. In other words, it's very clear in the Quran, do not despair of the mercy of Allah. It's a command. So when I realize that I can do something better, the way to frame that is, MashaAllah, I am increasing in my practice and my iman. Instead of, I can't believe I didn't do that, and oh my God. Because you're not responsible for what you do not know. And this goes back to this wisdom and knowledge piece. If I don't know something and I do it, I am not responsible. So this is so amazing, that the mercy of God is that, but you do not beat yourself up. And a lot of people do this. You will see this. I mean, it's like an epidemic. I'll get to your sister. I'm not going to leave you out. It's like an epidemic that when people do something and they learn it's wrong, then they spend a week or 7-10 days beating themselves up. They carry it around like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I walked in front of you, brother, when you were praying. Oh my God, I hope Allah is going to forgive me. Astaghfirullah. And there's this whole negative, toxic piece going on, these thoughts that actually subdue the ruh.
Well, that's what happened to me when I was in the Christian faith. I got to the point where I really wanted to hunker down and try to become a true believer. And it always says that you are to aspire as closely to Christ as you can.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that we are faulting from the moment that we wake up, it's obviously impossible. And so I had gone for about 2 years really working on trying to become as, Jesus-like as possible.
Right.
But it was the worst time of my life because I was in such guilt, and then I became in such anger because it was so impossible that, but yet it's such it is a commandment for us to do. And so, I don't know if there's one in the Bible where it says, don't beat yourself up for it, because...
Well, love thy neighbor as thyself. And Fozzie, I haven't forgotten you, I promise. Jesus said, love thy neighbor as thyself. I think that's pretty out there because it means that I can't really know what love is unless I love me. And do people that love themselves beat themselves up?
I think some do.
Well, then do you really love
not that it's
yourself?
pure love, I see what you're saying.
Do you want to, if I love myself and I believe what Allah has said about me, and I'm getting used. If I love myself and I believe what Allah has said about me, Allah has said about me that I was created in the best of molds, but that I can stoop lower than the animals. I can be like a beast.
Yeah.
But if I love myself, no one truly believes until he or she loves for their brother what they love for themselves. So yes, I think there's a huge principle there that you cannot beat yourself up because there's no love there.
Because you're right, you will end up destroying yourself.
Absolutely. Sister Fazia, thank you for your patience.
Thank you for giving me a chance. If I understand your question, the thing is that Allah made us. We are His creation. He knows what is good and what is bad for us. So the best thing to know what to ask Him. He's also teaching all the prayers in the book, in His book. So the only thing we have to do, open the book and find out those prayers with what He's teaching, what to ask.
Yeah, I was just making a kind of a statement to open sometimes people's eyes that you get people that are believers, but they get caught up in the worldly sense versus coming before Him in, like you said, a very humble state, and it has already been laid out for you. You know what I'm saying? And that's what He repeatedly says. Like, it's already been laid out. Like, if you don't accept the word, then you are not a true believer. I think he said something like that.
Like Imam Said said, the worldly stuff, you can also ask that too. My father used to say, if you have to ask the shoelace, you ask from him. So, asking worldly stuff is anything. Like, but like your question was like how to get the essence of the dua, like, the basic about the wisdom and all other things. We sometimes we don't know what to ask. Believe me, I'm a born Muslim and I still sometimes I'm exploring what to ask. Okay, so I read Quran and find out duas what Prophet used to ask, what Allah is teaching us or through Prophet to what to ask. So that is all like I
sometimes
found.
they ask for nothing and just to praise Him only, and then be on your way.
That is the high station you're
And to that, remember that the messenger of God said that our iman is like laundry, and it fluctuates like 40 times in a day. So I might wake up in the morning not feeling too good until I do my stretching, and I might not really be getting up in the morning, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, because I can hardly move in my physical body. Then once I get my stretching done, then I'm ready to pray. I can sit, and I can bend, and I can go into ruku and sujood. So keeping in mind that this is a piece of wisdom too, to know your station, to know where you are, to have that awareness of the divine presence. And this is why dhikr is so important. Allah said, if you don't remember me, I won't remember you. So that constantly being in the divine presence is making dhikr, reading the Quran, contemplating about Allah. And then there's this the ruh is connected. You're connected, and it's unseen. It's part of the spiritual world. So you may not even, it's hard to describe it even, but you will have an awareness that I'm connected with Allah. Yeah. Yes, Sister.
I'm just saying for the human, like the Prophet, the companion, they were the highest people, and they all asked to each other, when we are sitting with Prophet, peace be upon him, our iman level is more high, and the moment we leave his company, we are just involved in other things. So we are human, you know,
Oh,
so don't feel guilty.